building.
Really exciting. This is one I will say, okay, it's Valentine's Day, and I will say that this will be a for the love of shooting. I am a huge fan of shooters. I grew up Reggie Miller fan.
Yep.
He made me fall in love with the three-pointer, and I'm not sure that I've really ever seen a college basketball player who could get their shot off as quickly and as effectively as you could. So, welcome to the show, Ryan Appleby.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the kind words. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. And I guess just to start, how are things? What are you up to?
Things are good. I've been in real estate now for over a decade, probably like 12 years. Um, and so, still keep track of Husky basketball and whatnot and basketball in general. Been a season ticket holder for a lot of years now. But yeah, been involved in real estate and, still watching the dogs.
Now, I saw you at a recent game. Has it been far enough now? Do people still recognize you? Obviously, you get a shout out at the games, but when you're kind of out and about in life, do you have people still at times recognize you as Ryan Appleby, the basketball player?
Yeah, they'll ask. I mean, my name's not one of those names that's pretty common, right? So they'll be like, "Hey, are you the guy? You just don't look like you used to." And I'm like, "Yeah, I just have a lot less hair,
Yeah.
right, than what I used to have." So yeah, I still get that in times in business and things like that. But as you get older, you don't look the same, right? So it gets. I'm not a Spencer Hawes or a John Brockman type, where it's just a big human being, so
Mhm.
it's a little bit easier for me to fit in and not seem like, I was a basketball player or anything.
Mhm. And walk me back to when you were coming out of high school. Why'd you choose Florida over UW?
You know, back then like the game today has been a lot of that like pace and space. Back then, the way you got that kind of pace and space was the teams that were willing to like full court press, and then they would run up and down because of it, right? It's always challenging to run on a made basket, fast break. And I was so used to getting a lot of my points in transition opportunities before defenses could get set, whether that be in, coming up bringing the ball up the floor and pulling up off the dribble, right? Or, catching on the wing and being able to get into the middle of the paint or at the rim, those type of things like I did growing up. And it was Billy Ball back in those days. Coach Donovan, was a disciple of Rick Pitino during his days at Kentucky. And he was running Billy Ball and he was successful at it. And then I got there and we had a totally different team. We were playing half court basketball. We had a
Mhm.
bunch of sets and we were slowly bringing the ball up the floor. And that for a player of my size is not a good level of speed for
Mhm.
the SEC. I need to be able to get up and down. But I grew up watching, a lot of those Florida teams, Jason Williams, White Chocolate. And so, those were the things that kind of drew me to Florida.
What'd you think of Billy Donovan? I only got to interview him one time, and I thought he was awesome. So, what was your takeaway?
Same. Awesome. I would say he's got a very good like business basketball mind. He understands people really well. And so, he's good at managing players. He loves guys that can score the ball
Mhm.
and make shots. I couldn't tell you we spent much time at all talking about defense when I was there. And he really didn't talk to many guys about like shooting. He always had his favorite guys that he kind of like loved watching them play, I think, when he was coaching them. And
Mhm.
so he would just kind of give some of those guys the free rein and the green light and hopes that they would win. When Florida had their run and they had those couple championships back to back. He had definitely a way more well-rounded team with players that were playing different roles and whatnot. But when I was there, it was kind of just free flow.
Mhm. And then and then I was looking up your bio today, and I was thinking about how much things have changed because you had to sit. That was when you had to sit out a year, right?
Yeah.
I'm guessing you wish you could have just kind of like lived in this new NIL world.
Yeah, the NIL world is interesting on a lot of different levels. Obviously, the monetary benefits of it would have been great. Um, as far as, sitting out for me actually was great. I've always kind of felt like I've done most things later in life, kind of
Mhm.
been a late mature in that regard. And so for me, sitting out gave me another year just of like physical maturity. Not that I've ever been a physically imposing human, but it did help me in that regard to sit out and get another year under my belt. But yeah, it would have been interesting, when I was making my decision to transfer, it would have been interesting when you have other opportunities just because you can go play somewhere else right away, you can get paid to do it or whatnot. It would have opened up a different world or a different reason, why maybe I would have transferred somewhere else.
Mhm. And it seems like looking back, the decision you did make was the right one. It looked like, at least from an outside observer, it looked like you guys were having a lot of fun. And knowing Spence and Brockman, that would have seems like it would have been a great team to be around.
I played with a ton of great guys, but a ton of great players too. I think that, when you're a basketball player, one thing you just don't realize sometimes until you look back is like how good some of those guys were because you're in the moment, like in practice you're competing against them, and then when you're in the moments in games, you're not looking at it from a fan's perspective. You understood they how many points they scored or how they changed the game or whatnot, but you're not able to see it through a fan's perspective. And so to have that perspective to look back on things, I mean, I was there, like I couldn't have timed it any better. You had guys like Nate Robinson and Brandon Roy, and Jamal Williams, and Bobby Jones. And then I was there with Brockman and Spencer and Pondexter. I mean, Justin Holiday was young when I was there, but obviously he turned out to be a great player. I was just there at the right time. I barely missed Isaiah Thomas by a year, right? I mean, I couldn't have timed it any better to be able to play with those guys, and what so many of them did have done in the game of basketball, especially in the NBA and stuff. It's been pretty cool to watch.
Is there, I love hearing sort of behind the scenes stories. Is there something that sticks out to you, a moment, maybe something that people wouldn't know of one of those teams, an interaction with a player, a funny moment at practice, something like that?
Um, I mean, we had a lot of good characters on the team, so and we had guys from a lot of different, like local guys, but from different walks of life, right? We had kids that were from the inner city and, kids that were from rural areas like myself and John, and then somebody like Spencer who was from, Queen Anne Hill, and then somebody like Quincy Pondexter, who was from Fresno, the dirtiest city in the world.
I would
Hopefully,
agree. Well, I don't know.
hopefully he
Bakersfield will
sees
give it a
that.
run for its money because I
Yeah,
live
there you
there.
go. Yeah, I'm hoping he sees this. But um, not one moment. One thing that's so interesting, I think that, Brandon Roy obviously would have gone down as one of the greatest. Brandon Roy would have gone down as one of the greatest players of all time in basketball, right? Just in general, had he had the NBA career that he was on track to have. I remember going from my redshirt year into my first year of playing, which my redshirt sophomore year, and people were saying, yeah, around the country, Brandon's good, this or that, but he had some injuries, and he kind of took a back seat to guys on the team too. But in practice, you're like, this guy's far better than anybody I've ever been around. And
Mhm.
going into a senior year, one thing was like, well, he can't make outside shots, right? And three pointers back then were a lot different than they are today, and he just kind of started showing up and next year and making shots,
Mhm.
right? Brandon was one of those guys that you look back on, and you just kind of go, it's unreal. Like anything he wanted to do, he could do. It wasn't really necessary that he had to spend, uh, hours and hours in the gym shooting 1,000 shots a day or whatnot. When it was like, oh, he can't do this, he would just show up and prove everybody wrong. I think that was one of the craziest things I look back on because I always spent so much time working on my game, in
Mhm.
order to play at that level. But somebody like Brandon was just his feel and his natural ability to do anything on the floor was amazing.
And it really did seem, I actually saw you as I was kind of doing some research looking back. You were on a podcast a few years ago talking about your mindset. And, while things did come so naturally for Brandon, it does seem like you really worked at it to get your mind right, your shot right, and all that.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of was small town type kid, right? Gym rat type kid. All I did was play basketball from the moment I woke up to go to class, go to school, play after school. That's just all I did. And I wasn't in the inner city. And so I had to have drills in order to work on my game. So I wasn't necessarily playing 3-on-3 and 5-on-5 all the time. I was working on individual skill stuff, and that's why I got into, Pistol Pete and guys like that, Jason Williams, White Chocolate, that spent a ton of time on their games, that were also kind of in rural areas and whatnot. And all you could do is kind of just practice. And as you see the game today, it's so much more individual based and so much more individual skill based, and like basketball training and the ways to like learn the game and stuff digitally online and stuff. That's just it's night and day from what it was, for me. And back in those days, you didn't necessarily, you could play, there was more team basketball going on. So you could play the game differently as well, and affect the game at different levels. But as we see today, the skill thing is so important. But the mindset was big for me, and the whole mindfulness training, self-improvement, whatever you want to call it, is obviously just for the common everyday person has become a lot bigger, especially since COVID, right?
Mhm.
You've seen it. And so the mindfulness thing for me is a big part of my life, and it was when I was a player, and it's just continued to evolve.
And when you talk about that practicing and you had that quick release, how do you practice something like that when, it feels like it'd be easier if someone's coming at you and you have to get your shot off quickly? How did you train yourself on that?
I kind of always played the game of basketball with a pretty high sense of urgency. So when you kind of move, in that kind of speed, it kind of was one of those things that was more of a natural thing. I wasn't somebody ever growing up where I was, going to get my shot off by jumping higher than somebody. So I had to find different ways. Obviously, as the game has evolved, people have found different ways to get shots, and they've kind of been allowed to shoot them differently off 1 foot, or leaning to the side. And James Harden changed the game with all of his different like step backs and things like that to create space. A lot of times when I was playing, those things weren't allowed as much,
Hmm.
right? And so you had to find a way to get your shot off, and way to do that was, jump higher, right, and get it off, or get it off quicker. And so
Hmm.
I think it was just kind of one of those like survival mentalities in a way, where it was like, in order for me to get my shot off consistently, in any spot on the floor, I just got to get it off quicker. So
Hmm.
I trained that way. It's kind of one of those things where coaches will tell you you need to train at game speed all the time. Well, any of the shots that I took, I didn't do a ton of form shooting. I just did a bunch of game shooting drills all the time.
Hmm.
So I was always on the move, catching and shooting, or pulling up and shooting. And so it was just kind of a natural progression for me.
Hmm. And I can tell just in talking how much you know the game, how much time you spent around it, and that you still keep in touch with it. How do you do that? How do you, like how much basketball do you still watch? What are ways you stay involved with the game?
Yeah, my dad and I have had season tickets for, I don't forever now, with Husky basketball. So we go to a fair amount of the games, the home games. So that's kind of where I get, obviously the Sonics haven't been around for a long time. So that's where I kind of get the live interaction with the game. But most of the time it's just digital online stuff. I'm not somebody that spends a ton of time watching full games at
Mhm.
home, or with a buddy or something like that. I'm more just kind of watching, clips of things, or looking things up that I kind of want to, pay attention to more in the game. I think that probably, I don't know if there's ever been a period from like 2000, maybe like 2012 to 18 or so, where the game's changed that much in such a short period of time. Obviously, Steph Curry was a big part of that. But I mean, the game has changed so much since I played. And it's not like I played 50 years ago,
Yeah.
but it has changed so much, and it changed in kind of that 5 or 6 year period to such a high degree, that I think for a lot of people that played in my era or whatnot, it kind of, if you're not paying attention, it passed you by.
Mhm.
But basketball's kind of always been one of those things that's, I'm an observant person, and so I like pattern recognition and things like that. There's a lot of different patterns in the games within the games that are going on, so it's always kind of captured my attention to a certain degree.
Mhm. Do you still play pickup? How much do you miss playing?
Uh, Couldn't tell you the last time I shot a ball. I don't miss it at all. I enjoy the game more from like kind of like I said, a cerebral standpoint, the game
Mhm,
within the game and the pattern recognition and things like that, and kind of watching how people react or interact with situations and circumstances that are going on the floor with them. And I think those are the things that capture my attention. Obviously, I've loved the way the game has evolved. Certain people haven't. But guys like Steph Curry and James Harden and whatnot have really changed the game. Obviously, there's some toning down that could go on with some different rules at the NBA level. But even in the college game, I've loved to see how it's evolved in more of that pace and space type. It's something I kind of grew up playing, and
mhm,
it's something that I tried to play a certain way. So it's been something fun for me to watch. I know that, a lot of guys like, half court basketball and sets and throw it into the post and play out of the post and those type of things because that's what they're used to. But I've really enjoyed watching the game evolve.
mhm. Do you think if you went out today, could you still shoot it?
Yeah. I could still make shots, not in a game, but
Mhm,
if you were just shooting around with me, I could still make shots. It's one of those things that you just, I did it so many hours and I
mhm,
shot it so many times that it's like riding a bike. You don't really lose that. Do I have the conditioning to run up and down for 40 minutes and shoot it at game speed? No. But, I could make shots if we were playing horse or something.
mhm. And take me back a little bit. You talked about how much time you spent in a gym shooting. How did you kind of develop that love for the game? I know we were talking about before we started recording, the relationship between your dad and Ken Bone. Were you just always around the game, or was there a specific moment where it really clicked for you?
Yeah, my dad was a pretty big basketball junkie. When I was a little kid, I can remember just from a young age of like 4 or 5, he was, going around and playing open gyms at night or on the weekends. And so he would take me with him, and I'd just kind of be on the sidelines and watch and shoot around and those type of things and dribble and whatnot. And so that kind of was, my first kind of experience with the game.
Mhm,
And as you know, if you kind of, as a young age, you kind of start to form certain things about your mentality and your personality and kind of things you like and don't like. And the more you're around them, you kind of gravitate to them and you learn certain things from a cerebral standpoint.
mhm,
When you're young, that you don't really know what you're doing, but you're picking things up just by watching. And so I think because of that, being around my dad and being around all those open gyms, I started to kind of want to do what everybody else was doing out there that I saw, right?
mhm,
So I started just working on it. And so from a young age, even, when I wasn't really old enough to be shooting on a 10-foot hoop, I had a hoop inside my house, that I was playing on 24/7. And watching videos back in the day. I'm dating myself, but the VHS tapes and those type of things. I
mhm,
was recording games, back in those days on VHS tapes, and I'd watch them and rewatch them. And, now in the days of YouTube and in your phone and those type of things, it's so easy to learn the game that way. But just being around the game with my dad, and kind of wanting to be or be able to do what those guys were doing, really just kind of pushed me to want to work on my game.
How crazy is it that when we were growing up, because you're not so much younger than I am, that's how it was. Like we got maybe NBA on NBC on the weekend, we got the games
Yeah.
on TNT, and I don't even think you got every playoff game at that point. And that was, the thing you had to time the VHS, you had to hope the tape didn't run out, you had to hope it didn't break, you had to hope it actually recorded the game. And then now it's like, I'm a huge Indiana Pacers fan
Yeah.
and I watch every game on Sling on my phone and it's
Yeah.
nuts.
Yeah, I can definitely remember malfunctions on trying to record those. Also, sometimes if you were fast forwarding and rewinding too much, eventually the tape would break, right?
Hmm.
In certain areas. Because I would go back and just rewatch the stuff over and over again. I had drawers full of the VHS tapes that I would watch. I'd fall asleep to them most nights, watching them, just trying to learn. And for us, I think we grew up a lot in the glory days of the NBA. you know, with all those teams in the Eastern Conference back in those days and the NBA on NBC on the weekends and stuff. But yeah, there was blackouts where you couldn't see games and it was tough to get like East Coast games a lot of times, through cable networks unless it was just whatever was playing on those Saturday morning games and TNT wasn't as big back then. They were starting to play games when I was, farther along in high school and
Hmm.
whatnot. But yeah, I mean, I think the great thing about that was like kind of the imaginary and the creative side to it. You kind of had to you while you were playing by yourself, you had to gain that imaginary aspect of
Hmm.
it, and you got that visualization aspect of it. That's that kind of mindfulness side to kind of training the mind at the same time to just kind of play more intuitively or instinctively
Hmm.
post through some pre-programmed set of rules or circumstances.
Hmm.
And that's one thing that is great about basketball. Like anybody that just shoot hoops or whatnot, you can just kind of go out and lose yourself in
Hmm.
it, right? You can just shoot around and all of a sudden it's like 30 minutes later and you're like, where am I? Right?
Hmm.
You can just it's one of those things you just kind of get lost in.
It's amazing that you say that because I was the same way. I can't remember exactly what year it is, but it was the year of the first Dream Team, and I believe it was also the same year that Detroit beat the Blazers in the finals. And I was at my grandparents' house and had nothing to do all day long, but I did have a Little Tykes full court, right? So they had a huge driveway up in front of their garage, and I had it set up, and I would just play as if I was Isaiah Thomas or Jordan and just run situations for hours and hours and hours. And it was just like you say, I just kind of got lost in it.
Yeah, you kind of imitate and try to duplicate and then make it your own,
Hmm.
right? And I think that was the cool thing. You could, that there you could go out and watch the game and then try to imitate them on out in your driveway after all that type of stuff and before school and that kind of got the itch out of me and then I could actually go sit in class and somewhat pay attention, right? To then,
Hmm.
you know, go out after school and start playing again.
Hmm. Now back to playing a little bit. I was looking up some clips and I saw the Aaron Brooks elbow. What do you remember about that moment?
Well, when something like that happens, not a lot. You don't remember a lot. I mean, I've got some vague memories of it. It's kind of like one of those like freak accident type things in a way,
Hmm.
right? Where like, I think everybody was like so caught off guard about it. And it just kind of it happened so fast. And it happened. We're Staples Center, Pac-10 tournament, and I kind of after I got up off the floor and they sat me down, I had to go back in the locker room and get stitches. I think
Hmm.
I got like 6 or 8 stitches on my upper lip. No idea how it didn't hit any of my teeth or anything like that. I got super lucky, right?
Hmm.
It's kind of that space in between your nose and your teeth. And until you just asked me about it, I hadn't thought about it in so long. It used to
Hmm.
be something that people would bring up to me a fair amount, probably 5, 6, 7 years, even after I was done playing. But it's something I haven't thought about in a long time. But yeah, I don't remember a ton about it because you kind of like when you get hit in the face, you kind of black out, right?
Hmm.
And that's kind of what happened. But yeah, it was kind of one of those things that was like, how the heck did I get involved in something like this? Especially like a player like me, right? Like I wasn't out there playing a physical style of basketball, right?
Hmm.
Where you get caught up in stuff and guys get chippy and all that kind of thing. But yeah, it was kind of one of those freak moment type things. And like I said, I haven't thought about it in a long time, but you just kind of move on from it. It's been so long now. So
did you guys ever talk about it again or?
no, not really. From what I remember, the next year, like I think he got suspended, so he couldn't play. at our place.
Hmm.
But then when we went to Eugene and played, he could play. And um, the fans hated me there, you know? And
Yeah.
so like they had like all these, pictures and signs up of me in the student section with my bloody face and all that kind of stuff. And they tried to like villainize me about the whole thing. And I was kind of like, well, wait, hold on here. But how student sections are. They're always looking for reasons to try to get under the other team's skin. And so, yeah, it was. I probably remember that more. I remember going out there onto the floor, like they had to have like a policeman come onto our bus, walk me off the bus, get me into the arena, get me downstairs into the locker room, just because the Oregon fans, were villainizing me over the whole situation.
Hmm.
Um, and then I wasn't even paying attention, and I came up for early shooting, whatever that was, about an hour before the game. And the student section, everything was already full. And I walked up there by myself, not paying attention, and the place just erupted in boos. And they had their signs up and, their photos of me being all bloody and stuff. And that kind of caught me off guard. But I ended up, I think I had about like 18 or 19 points or something in the first half.
Hmm.
And then they double teamed me in the second, so I couldn't even really catch the ball ever. But those are kind of the moments that you live for as a competitor. And that's why you play the game and you play college basketball at the highest level. There was opportunities for me to like play at smaller colleges, smaller Division ones, but I went to Florida and I went to UW and played in two of the bigger conferences for college basketball. And it's because I always wanted to prove myself at the highest level.
Hmm.
Um, and so kind of live for those type of moments as a competitor. So, looking back on it, it's just another moment in time, and you learn a lot of things from those situations from perspective, and you also kind of get to see how you respond to adversity or different events in your life.
Hmm. And here, like just in the course of this conversation, and I've really had this thought a lot lately as I've re introduced myself to the basketball community here, and just over the years, the amount of time and relationships I've been able to build with people, and just like the longevity from, seeing now Jamal Crawford at games and, getting to play pickup games with Will when we were both, working at the UW and, being around Spencer since he was a freshman in high school and Brockman, and then seeing Brandon coaching at Garfield and on and on and on and on. And I feel so fortunate to be a part of the, to be some like,
Yeah.
to go places and people are like, oh, hey, Mason, we're happy to see you. Right. And that's really special for me. And I'm one, even though, we're in Stanwood, but you're still with your ties to UW, you're so connected to there. What does that mean for you?
At the time, when I was growing up, UW wasn't very good at basketball, right? Those Bob Bender years and whatnot. They had that little bit of a run there with Donald Watts in the Sweet 16, where they also lost to UConn like us. But like you probably, we all kind of grew up watching like UCLA or Arizona or North Carolina or Duke or Georgetown or any of those big kind of powerhouse colleges, because those were the ones that were on, TV, right? Those ones we could see. And Gonzaga wasn't Gonzaga back when we were growing up, right, with basketball. And so I think a lot of us, were kind of always figuring we would go to school somewhere else because of that, right? Or you
Mhm.
kind of dreamed to go play at a college that you were growing up watching on TV. And I think that's how a lot of guys were around my era. And like I said earlier, like when you're in the middle of something, you don't really realize like the impact or the downstream effects from it or whatnot. But and when you're in the middle of it, you're not realizing how many players of high level or caliber are coming through the state. It's just like
Mhm.
normal to you because
Mhm.
you're competing at a high level and you're playing on the AU circuit against all these players, right? You don't have the internet 24/7 and people blowing up your phone and stuff and ways to look at media. So you're kind of unaware of it, right?
Mhm.
And then, even when I was coming through and I decided to come back to UW still wasn't like, kind of a powerhouse program on the West Coast like we were when I was there. Now that being able to reflect on it and have perspective on it and see all the players that kind of came through Seattle over like a 15-year period or so, and relate that to the rest of the country and huge markets or huge population
Mhm.
areas, I mean, is unreal, right? And then to have so many of these guys stay around and play at the UW. And then you see the downstream effects of that, being able to be around the program after the fact and being able to be around those guys. Like if you just Jamal Crawford and Brandon Roy, how many players in the history of the game of basketball have had their skill level?
Very few. Very-
Very few,
Yeah.
right? And they're both from Seattle, and they're
Mhm.
both super active in the basketball community, as we all know. And they're just legends of the game,
Mhm.
right? And those two guys alone, like, are in our Seattle area all the time,
Mhm.
being around the game. So, I mean, to answer your question, it's somewhat surreal, to kind of see like how how it all panned out, how it
Mhm.
all turned out for so many of these guys. I mean, like the run that like Isaiah Thomas before he got hurt was having in the NBA.
Mhm.
Real, right? How many guys
Yeah,
ever put up stats like that in the
exactly.
NBA? The history of the game,
Yeah.
right? We've got guys like that are just kind of like, and I think some of our sports fans are somewhat like spoiled in the way. Like they don't realize that like this isn't the norm.
Yeah.
Like this isn't normal. This doesn't happen in places like Washington State, right? I mean, we're like the Maine of the West Coast or something, right?
Mhm.
Like this isn't coming out. We're like, has Maine or Vermont or Rhode Island had like, you know, 10 NBA players a year for a certain
Mhm.
period of time come out of there? No, right? So it's just it's been awesome to see. It's like I said, it's surreal in a way, but um it provides some longevity for the
Mhm.
game around our area, and especially when we haven't had, that same level of high D1, college basketball players coming out of the state year in and year out over the last few years.
Yeah, I mean it's so crazy when I was actually just thinking about this the other day that I would put the Metro League, I mean Washington as a whole, but the Metro League specifically, I would put it up against any league in the country, and that's wild, right? Like New York City, LA, like I would put money on the Metro League in almost any scenario.
Yeah, it, it's unreal. I mean, I think there probably needs to be another like, Times article or something that comes out and lists all of like the Division 1 players that came out of the state over like that, 15-year period or
Mhm.
so, because I think it would give some people some perspective.
Yeah.
And go,
Yeah.
oh wow. Like, yeah, I mean, everybody gets caught up in their daily lives and doesn't pay attention. They see, guys like Jamal or Brandon, right, who are in the media a lot. But like, if you were just to look at the names of all those people that came through in that period, I think
Mhm.
people would be astonished. Um, because it's unreal, and the places that they went and played at,
Mhm.
right? And then looking at it today, you're kind of like, well, where did all those players go?
Mhm.
Right? I mean, we were just so spoiled for so long.
And I wonder too, I thought about this for years, how much of what happened in Seattle basketball was because of Sean and Gary with the Sonics, right? Like all of us, people a little bit young. I mean, Jamal's about my age. We all grew up with that. And I don't think it's a coincidence that that was part of the deal.
No, I think it's a big part of it, having the Sonics around and them being good at it, right? I think it's them being so good at the game, and the excitement that they brought. I think it forms like a belief in you, like that you can do it too, right? Because you're watching it all the time and you can watch it live, right? And it gets you to dream. I also think that that was also at a time where um like a lot of the urbanization hadn't occurred,
Mhm.
right? Before we had a lot of the big businesses and technology and stuff that had moved in. I think we've seen a lot of different like types of kids come into the area, right? As their parents have moved here for business, and we're not seeing some of the same athletes that we do because of that, right?
Mhm.
As well. But yeah, I mean, us having an NBA team back in the city and that was good and whatnot, I mean, I think it would definitely spur some things. But having guys like, like Brandon and Jamal in the community and coaching and being in the media all the time, and the kids being able to see their highlights and stuff,
Mhm.
that definitely does help, keep somewhat of a pipeline going.
Mhm. Yeah, I would agree. And I don't know if there's anything more valuable in our community right now for the, continuation of that level of talent than, what Jamal's doing with the crossover and all that. So that's pretty awesome. The one other thing, and I say this every week, I'm on the free version of the Zoom plan, so we're going to get cut off in about 3 minutes. But I definitely wanted to ask you one more thing. You know, do you still have the Sports Illustrated cover? And that had to be pretty surreal to be on there in that kind of photo back then.
I do have it. I've got one in my house. My parents have them somewhere, not hanging up anywhere, but
Mhm.
my parents have some, but I do have one hanging up in my house. Definitely surreal. I didn't do a lot of media like when I was at UW. I was kind of just I didn't care about it a lot, you know. I
Mhm.
was just kind of a basketball junkie guy, and I just wanted to play basketball. And who we talked about earlier, Dan Leps, he kind of let me scoot around a lot of media stuff a lot.
Mhm.
And he randomly calls me, and he's like, "Hey, Sports Illustrated wants to shoot a cover with." I think it was on like a Saturday. He said, and this was like preseason, right on a Saturday
Mhm.
going, "Hey, Sports Illustrated wants to shoot a cover with you and John." And I was kind of like, "What?" And I was like, "Okay." And he's like, "Show up to the gym on this day and time and shoot the cover." And you're kind of going through it and you're like, "Oh, like what?" Still, you're kind of like, you don't really know what it is or what the impact is. You go through it, you do it, and then it's on the cover of Sports Illustrated and it's being sold in airports and grocery stores and all that kind of stuff, especially when print media was a lot bigger back then. And, you're going around and playing in different colleges around the country, and people are waiting after the games for you to sign that cover that you're on in Sports Illustrated. So I think still to this day, I don't know if it's ever really hit me that it's like, wow, like Sports Illustrated, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, what an amazing opportunity John and I were blessed with to be able to do that. To have Huskies on the cover. Was Isaiah on there twice?
I think so. I'd
Sports
have to go back and
Illustrated?
check.
I feel
Yeah.
like he was on there twice or
Yeah.
something, which is, I mean, unreal. Like in like a 5 or 6 year period to be have Huskies on the cover of Sports Illustrated that many times.
Mhm.
I mean, amazing, right? Just speaks to the impact that Coach Lorenzo had, and all the different, Seattle basketball legends had on the game for guys like John and I to be able to be on the cover of that.
Mhm. And then last thing, and I know we touched on this when we were trading messages. I am now determined to get you and John together to recreate that photo in some form or fashion. So we're just going to put that out there in the world.
Okay.
I've messaged John. I'm gonna put it on you two, and the three of us we're
Okay.
gonna do it. So
Okay. Let's make it
um,
happen. That'd be pretty funny. I'd enjoy it.
absolutely, absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
I appreciate the time. Thank you so much. I love talking ball and especially shooting. So this has been a real treat for me.
Yeah. Thank you. All right.